Hi, welcome to the Gestalt Show where we talk about psychology, design, and all the interesting things in between. I'm Mohsin, and this is episode 2. Let's talk about the name of this show. Although for some people it may sound too foreign, Gestalt, I chose the name because it's a name that is familiar by both people in design and also people in psychology. I learned about Gestalt as a psychology student throughout most of my psychology subject, and I believe design students learn about it in their first year. Although I've been told some may not even remember. Well, here's a quick recap. I've taken the name Gestalt Show from a school of thought in psychology known as Gestalt Psychology. It originated in Germany with the works of these three guys, Max Wertheimer, Wolfgang Kohler, and Kurt Kofka. They studied on human perceptions, and what they found was that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This is a famous saying, but what does it mean? Let's imagine a bicycle. I'm sure each of you will have your own imagination of a single object, which is a bike. Well, it's not actually a single object, is it? Technically, it's a metal frame with two tires, one at the front and one at the back, a chain, a gear, two foot pedals, and a handle on each side, and a seat. But as the human perception goes, we perceive it as a single thing, a bike. Well, let me tell you a little bit about brain. It's really lazy. The brain always finds shortcuts to make sense of all the information it receives from our five senses. And because of that, Gestalt psychologists have laid out the Gestalt principles that helps us to understand how human perceives the world around them. This will be part 1 of a 2 episode where we look into the 5 Gestalt principles. First, let's talk about the principle of similarity. This principle states objects that look similar to each other belong together. Now, try drawing a 3x3 grid. The first row contains 3 units of squares, the second row contains 3 units of circles, and the third 3 units of triangles. If you ask someone near to you to describe the grid that you have just drawn, most people will describe it as 1 row of squares, 1 row of circles, and 1 row of triangles. Why don't we describe it as 3 columns with a square, a circle, and a triangle in each of them? That is the principle of similarity. This principle is valid even in our daily lives. For example, when we see 2 kids with similar facial qualities, we will immediately assume that they are siblings, right? Now, how can this principle help designers? Designers can help group information or objects together by manipulating their design elements. You can play around with lines, shapes, colors, texture, form, and also value. For example, let's say you're making an infographic with a lot of information that needs to be conveyed in a single page. You can try grouping the information that are related to each other by either color coding them or having similar icons to tag them. Now, let's move on to principle number 2, principle of proximity. The principle states that things that are close in distance to each other belong together. Now, let's draw the same grid with the same 3 squares in the first row, 3 circles in the second row, and 3 triangles in the third row. But now, instead of all 3 rows having the same distance between them, let's draw the first row a little bit further away from the second and the third rows. Now, most likely, we will be describing the first row as an individual row, but rows 2 and 3 will be perceived as a single larger row instead. Now we'll be perceiving 2 lines. One is bigger than the other. Again, things that are closer to each other belong together. Now, how will this play out in our everyday events? Let's say we see 3 people walking close to each other, a male adult, a female adult, and a child. Since they are close to each other, they are walking together, it's only logical for us to assume that they are a family. We do this every day, even when we interact with products. When we look into the interior panel of a car, we see the infotainment unit, we see our aircon vents. In this situation, humans will likely assume that the buttons and the knobs closer to the infotainment unit will be controlling the infotainment unit, and the buttons and the knobs that are closer to the aircon vents will control how cool the aircon is and maybe turn it off and on as well. These 2 principles that we have talked about in this episode today can be applied into different settings as well. In interior design, for example, we can play with proximity and similarity of furnitures to group them together. Web design can benefit by having icons that serve related functions put closer together so that they can be perceived as a group. So I think that's it for this first part of the Gestalt Psychology series. In the next episode, we'll look into the rest of the Gestalt principles, which are the principle of closure, principle of continuity, and figure ground principle. I hope to see you again in the next episode. In the meantime, take care and stay safe, everyone.